Hello everybody and welcome back to another Borderlands 3 video. My name is Nootmad and today I'll be taking you guys through some important pieces of information that I think every Moze player should know about. So in the last episode we broke down the Shield Retribution skill tree and discussed how it's useful and why each skill is worth and not worth picking up. So for this video and the following one I'm going to break down the rest of the skill trees, discuss what they're good for, what they synergize with, and what sort of situations that they won't be as optimal for. So, today we'll be diving into the Demolition Woman skill tree. As always, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get straight into it. Alrighty, so let's start at the beginning, shall we? Iron in the Skag Den. 5-point tier 1 skill. Basically deals incendiary damage whenever Moze deals splash damage. This incendiary bonus damage is 15%. So, early game, this skill works very nicely as it gives you a nice incendiary boost provided you are doing splash. However, once enemies begin to get more health in the late game, the skill falls off, and I'm going to tell you why. So, I briefly mentioned this in my very first episode in the series, but I will go into this in a bit more detail now. Basically, what this skill does, it scales off gun damage, your weapon type damage boosts, so those are those stat rolls you get on your class mod, and your relic, so something like flat off weapon damage, melee 1 weapon damage, and those sorts of things. Stoke the Embers, and elemental damage bonuses all buff the overall damage for fire in the Skag Den. So, after saying that, the guys that you may have noticed that the incendiary damage doesn't scale from two very huge factors of damage in endgame builds, those being splash damage and critical hit damage. So, just like that, this skill misses out on very powerful scaling multipliers, and that makes the skill not worth picking up or especially maxing out for damage. So that's probably why I wouldn't suggest investing 5 points into Fire in the Skag Den. However, in saying that, this skill does have some utility. What it does do well is it provides an incendiary damage proc that will do damage over time. We all know that damage over time can proc and maintain consecutive hits on it, for example, as well as our parallel ineffable damage proc. So this is why I would suggest putting a single point into it, just for the sake of its utility. I wouldn't max this skill out 5 out of 5 in late game builds, just to hope that you'll deal more damage, because at the end of the day, they are wasted points. So, that's Fire in the Skag Den out of the way. We now move on to Deadlines, a 3-point tier 1 skill, and it's mostly focused for Iron Bear. What it does is that whenever Iron Bear kills an enemy, it gains increased fuel, and this skill has diminished returns. So, this is a fairly straightforward skill. For an Iron Bear build that focuses on maximum uptime, Deadlines is a fantastic pickup. Even for early game Iron Bear builds, the extra duration can provide you with significant DPS uptime for bossing and mobbing alike. Obviously, if you don't plan on using Iron Bear at all in your build, I'd avoid this skill entirely because there's no reason to put points into a skill that you wouldn't use. So, that's Deadlines done. Move on to Grizzled. Grizzled is a kill skill that reduces Moze's remaining action skill cooldown time. Now, there's also another skill that reduces Moze's cooldown, and that's Explosive Punctuation. Just for the sake of making this a bit more clear, and to provide a comparison, I'm going to discuss both of these simultaneously. So, Explosive Punctuation is another action skill cooldown rate skill, and it basically increases the cooldown rate based on whenever she does splash damage. So, Explosive Punctuation is a tier 5 skill, Grizzled is a tier 1 skill. But one is better than the other, and to no one's surprise, that skill is Grizzled. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up some numbers on the screen, just to show you my testing and to compare these results that I have gotten. So, for these examples that I'm going to talk about right now, we're going to assume that I had no cooldown reduction bonuses on my gear, so those are like your access cooldown rate increases in your class mod relic. We'll assume no topped off, which is a guardian perk that increases your access cooldown rate while your shields are full, and we're going to assume that we don't have any access cooldown rate points in our guardian. So, an early exit Iron Bear, so basically getting in and out of Iron Bear, has a base cooldown of 35 seconds. After 3 kills, with 5 out of 5 Grizzled, you will have 22 seconds left in your cooldown. Essentially, you got 11 seconds off for killing 3 enemies. After 5 kills, you got 15 seconds left, which means you saved 20 seconds by getting those kills. Now, after a full usage of Iron Bear, so we're assuming you used Iron Bear and drained its fuel, now you're full cooldown, that cooldown is 100 seconds. So, obviously, 3 kills of Grizzled at 5 out of 5 will leave us with 87 seconds left, basically meaning we save 13 seconds, and once again, 20 seconds saved after 5 kills. So, With 5 points in explosive punctuation and no Grizzled, we'll have 71.4 seconds left. So we basically saved about 22 seconds. So you might be thinking, well, that is slightly faster. But after 8 kills, Grizzled equals this, assuming we had 5 out of 5, and any kills past that will extend Grizzled's lead. So what I'm basically saying is just after 8 kills, Grizzled is automatically better. Obviously over the span of 100 seconds, the likelihood of you getting more than 8 kills is incredibly high. Now, all these things is even before we consider having cooldown reduction on gear, your guardian ranks, and your topped off. So ultimately, Grizzled is a far better skill to have, and if you have the points, putting 4 or 5 points into this at the very least is highly recommended, and I wouldn't bother putting any points in explosive punctuation at all. So, those are our tier 1 skills out of the way. We move on to our tier 2, and the first one we get to is Moze Destruction. A 3-point skill, and it's a cornerstone skill in any splash based build. The more instances of splash damage you create, the better this skill will perform. This skill is best combined with grenades like the Cloning Maddening Tracker, that creates 27 grenades because it has multiple move and cloning parts that can each individually proc Moze Destruction. What I mean by that is that one Cloning Maddening Tracker grenade can proc Moze Destruction 27 times, basically increasing the likelihood of you returning ammo to your magazine to a very high amount. So this combination is seen in basically every Moze endgame build. Early game, this skill might not be as useful as you might not have gear that can create a lot of splash, so it's not always recommended, but for endgame splash based builds, there's no reason to pick it up. This skill is basically one of the most important skills for a splash build. So, aside from Means of Destruction, we now get to Torgue Cross-Promotion. It's a 5-point tier 2 skill, and deals splash damage increases, as well as splash damage radius, at a 15% chance. Prior to its buff, it didn't provide the splash damage bonus, and all it did was increase the splash radius, but since then, it now gives you a splash damage buff. It's a no-brainer pick. 5 points gives you an extra 30% splash damage, and as we all know, being able to put in extra splash damage bonuses to your build for Moze is incredibly powerful. So, this skill is great while leveling, especially if you have splash weapons, and perfect for endgame builds. Overall, it's a fantastic skill. Highly recommend picking it up and maxing it out as long as you have the points for it. So, now we get to another Iron Bear skill in the form of Stainless Steel Bear. What this skill does gives Iron Bear, additional armor, more fuel, and more damage. So, it's a fantastic skill to have, especially when you're running an early game Iron Bear build, so it's great for leveling. And also a critical factor in late game Iron Bear builds too, because whenever you get these sort of skills that can buff Iron Bear damage and the amount of armor you have, there's no reason not to pick them. So, as we all also know, this skill provides a damage boost to short fuse as well. This isn't a significant damage boost to short fuse, but it's enough to consider if you want to maximize the potential for a splash based build. Overall, it's a great skill for 5 points. So, now we move on to our tier 3 skills, and we start with Holy Pin, the Great Enabler. While the Holy Pin is fantastic for damage, but currently it isn't so great because grenades don't scale mayhem levels. However, this will change next week with the coming DLC 3 patch that will increase and change the way grenades scale with our mayhem levels. So, while the Holy Pin can also proc Redistribution, which is a skill in Moze's Bottomless Mag skill tree that regenerates ammo and health. So basically, when you're chucking grenades, you'll be getting health regen through that, as well as ammo regen. And because they're grenades, they'll also be synergizing well with Vampyr, so you can get a lot of bang for your buck when it comes to healing from just spamming grenades with this skill. And this skill also affects your Minesweeper micronades, and these allows said micronades to proc their own spawns, ultimately creating an exponentially damaging increasing damage chain. This is good for damage while leveling, and fantastic utility for endgame builds as well. So, we get to another an Iron Bear skill, and it's Auto Bear. What this basically does is turns Iron Bear into a sentry that lasts for 15 seconds once you exit. After that time is up, Auto Bear will then body slam the nearest enemy and result in an explosion. So, this is the best access for aggro draw that Moze can get. For example, Zane has his clone that enemies will target sometimes, and Flak has his pets that can taunt and draw enemies towards that, rather than Flak himself. In that same sort of logic, Portobear can draw enemies towards it and give Moze a bit of relief. It also enables constant slag, for lack of a better term, to be applied to enemies in the area through the use of target softening, which is a hardpoint augment, and it makes enemies take 15% more damage at the cost of reduced impact damage by the actual grenades. So these damage buffs don't stack, like I said before in the first episode. However, it's a nice little damage bonus for Moze to have, and as long as you position Portobear correctly, it'll constantly keep applying this to all the enemies in the area. And it works with Vampyr as well to heal himself. So, aside from this, you can also spread radiation procs with Portobear using Hammerdown Protocol. As you can see on the card, it just launches a nuke which deals massive radiation damage in a very, very big area, and all the enemies in that area basically get irradiated. So if you kill one, they'll explode in a radiation explosion. Those can then chain to nearby enemies and just create massive explosion chains, dealing lots and lots of damage. So, aside from this hardpoint, another one that's recommended to use with Portobear is capacitive armatures and corrosive saber rounds. One of each on each arm, still proc special spare which buffs Portobear damage, and you can use these capacitive armatures to strip enemy shields and corrosive saber rounds to destroy enemy armor. So it works very well with Moze as long as you have Vampyr up, and it gives Portobear a bit more utility. So, those are the tier 3 skills done. Now we move on to the tier 4s, and we start with Vampyr. Prior to Moze's recent skill buffs, this used to be Moze's only means of health regeneration, and what it does, it basically just gives you health regeneration based on the amount of damage you do. Not amount of damage, the amount of damage instances you create with grenade per each enemy hit. So, however, since its recent buff, it's now 1 of 3. Redistribution and Russian offensive, this is bottomless max trim, also gives a health regen and lifesteal respectively. So all those 3 skills combined together gives Moze a very large amount of survivability. So much like means of destruction, this skill works best with grenades that have a lot of cloning and Murph parts. That's why you would see a lot of builds use this skill alongside the cloning mat and tracker grenade. So, Vampyr is also the primary fuel for Bloodlether amp builds, as it gives you a fair chunk of shield restoration through Vampyr and the other 2 health regeneration skills, and the Bloodlether class mod that heals your shield, heals your shields, basically keeps it topped up so you can constantly amp your damage. It's a universally useless skill, and most times 2 or 3 points is enough. You don't always need to have 5 out of 5, but typically only 3 points is enough. However, if you do find you do need a lot of healing, there's no reason to not put 5 points into it. So that's Vampyr done. Moving on to our next tier 4 skill, and that's Why Can't I Carry All These Grenades. What this does for 3 points is just increases grenade capacity, and to be brutally honest, this skill is completely useless. Especially considering this is a tier 4 skill and is 3 points, it's a lot of investment to get to, and at the end of the day, you don't get much out of it. The grenade regeneration you get from means of destruction is more than enough, especially if you have the right grenade combined with that skill, so it makes the skill redundant. I wouldn't pick this up at all, even while you're leveling. There are much better skills to use. So, those are our tier 4s out of the way. We can move on to our tier 5s, and we get to the last. It's a solid utility skill, and now combined with the Touring to Die perk, which is one of the capstone skills in the Guardian perks, that basically restores your meter the more damage you do. Being able to throw a grenade like the Hex that can constantly deal damage over time gives you a very, very long time in fight for your life, and more or less guarantees you your second wind. This is a great skill to have while leveling as well, as it lets you deal a bit more damage while you're down, guaranteeing you a second wind in most situations. And for 1 point, it's a solid skill to pick up, and I'd say one of the best utility skills Moze has for 1 point. So, now after all that, we arrive at her capstone skill, Short Fuse. Whenever Moze deals gun damage, there is a chance of a secondary explosion centered on the target. Secondary explosion chance is 20%, so basically 1 out of every 5 shots you make. And those explosions is 75% off your gun damage. So, this skill in itself is a great powerhouse for every Moze splash build. I'm going to throw up the damage factors that scale with it, and as you see, unlike Skag Den, it scales a splash, which is how we're able to reach those really high damage numbers, and it also double dips. And by that, I mean it scales over its own damage, as well as splash a second time, alongside V1 and V2 damage multipliers, which is something I'll be covering in a future video in a bit more detail. So basically, all you need to know is that from this, Short Fuse scales with more or less every form of damage multipliers, resulting in massive damage numbers. This is easily Moze's best capstone skill, and in my opinion, one of the best capstones out of all Vault Hunters. So, that's it for the Demolition Woman tree, and I'll see you guys in a second.
Getting back to it.
So, that's it for the Demolition Woman skill tree. I hope you guys found this video informative and got something out of it. A final video after this one will be about the Bottomless Mag skill tree, and after that, like I mentioned in my previous video, I'll make a live build based on a gun that you guys decide, so you guys can sort of understand what sort of thought process I put in when I make a build, why I choose certain gear pieces, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's the video done for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, have an awesome day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!